Hi, everyone, and thank you for coming to this discussion of grant and fellowship applications. I'm Steve Pitti, professor of history, American studies, and ethnicity, race, and migration, and I direct Yale's Center for the Study of Race, Indigeneity, and Transnational Migration. I want to thank our staff, Maggie Katz and Nicole Edwards, for their help putting this event together today. This session is going to focus on identifying external and internal opportunities of interest to the RITM community, on identifying application strategies and the value of pursuing those opportunities for graduate and professional students. I'm really grateful for the presence of Dean Robert Harper-Mangels, who has been a dean in the Yale Graduate School of Arts and Sciences since 2006. He is currently Associate Dean for Admissions and Financial Support at Yale. In this position, he has primary responsibility for overseeing student fellowships and external funding applications. Dean Harper-Mangels has a bachelor's degree in music and psychology from Wesleyan University, and also a PhD in neuroscience and behavior from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Thank you so much, Dean Harper-Mangels, for being here with us today. I really appreciate your willingness to come and talk to us about applying for grants, which I think is going to be of great use to all of us. So thank you very much for being here today. For those of you who are present, please feel free to put questions in the Q&A, and we'll try to get those to Dean Harper-Mangels at the end. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. Happy to be here today. So we're going to talk about applying for grants. And the first thing that I would like to address is, actually the first thing I'd like to address is why here we go, getting my slides to move forward, is why you should apply for grants. A lot of students think that they have a full fellowship, they have 6 years of funding while they're at Yale. There's a lot of opportunities to get Yale funding for travel and research. So why should they spend the time applying for these grants? And the first thing I would say is that this is a really important career skill for all of you to be developing at this point. When you think about applying for a grant, what you're really doing is promoting your work. You're trying to get people excited about the kinds of things that you want to do to the degree that they would like to support it in some way. And this goes beyond just getting grant funding for the work that you're doing now. If you think about applying for a job, if you think about the kinds of careers that you might have in the future, you're often trying to sell people on the work that you're doing and getting them excited about how they can support what you want to do. So this is a great skill to be developing at this point in time when you have this safety net, when you have a stipend, when you have other forms of support available, so that if you go out and you don't get the fellowships, it's okay. We can still support you. You can still do the work that you need to do. But this is a great time to start working on these skills. One of the things you want to remember is that I like to say funding begets funding. So first of all, if you're applying for a grant and somebody's looking at your CV, they're looking at your background and seeing that, oh, this person's been supported by this agency to do this work, they've been supported in the past by this other agency, they look like they're good stewards of the money. They look like, when they say they're going to do something, they get it done. We feel better about supporting this student too, because we think that they will do what they say they're going to do. And it also gives you an opportunity, a valuable opportunity to establish a relationship with funding agencies. So that, and I use this example a lot with my science students. If you've applied to the NIH for a grant as a pre-doctoral grant, and you're funded and you do the work and you complete your PhD, and then you go and you get a postdoc and you apply for a postdoctoral grant and they agree to support that. Then when you're a junior faculty member and you're applying for that first, faculty grant, they're going to look and they're going to say, we supported this person when they were a pre-doc, and we supported this person when they were a postdoc. They've done what they said they were going to do. They've been successful throughout. Let's continue to back this horse. Let's continue to provide support to this person. They've been a good bet so far. So we should keep on with them. So establishing a relationship with a funding agency that might be useful to you in your future work is a good thing to do. And again, now is the time to establish that. And then there are just some practical benefits to you as a doctoral student. The first, of course, is that if you win an outside award, whatever it is they're providing you with, they'll provide you with a top up and bring you to the full stipend. Plus, you'll get $4,000 above the current stipend level, so you'll make a little bit more money. Or alternatively, if it's a travel award and you want to go abroad in a teaching year, you obviously aren't going to be paid if you're not teaching in say your third or fourth year. But outside funding gives you the flexibility to buy out your teaching or postpone your teaching and support yourself while you do field work in year 4, so that you don't need to go and use your dissertation fellowship, which you'd really like to preserve and have available to you when you come back. So you do have that teaching free year that you can start writing in. So I just want to talk about a few things. How do you get started? If I've convinced you that you should be applying for awards, how do you start this process? What should you be looking to do? So step one, obviously, is just finding fellowships to apply for. There's a database here at Yale, funding.yale.edu, which mostly contains competitive awards that are funded through Yale. These are usually endowed funds that are given to Yale to support travel or research in certain areas that you would apply for on a competitive basis, but it's Yale's money. It also would include fellowships that for which some sort of a Yale endorsement is required, so that if there's, say, a limited number of students from Yale are permitted to apply for some external fellowship, and we have to engage in some sort of a nominating process, you'll find most of those on the Yale grants and funding page. Grantforward.com is probably the single best site that I've ever seen. It's certainly not the only site out there, but it's a very comprehensive site. It contains large awards, small awards, federal awards, private awards. I think I went in the other day and typed in race and migration, and it came up with like 3,000 results. So you will have to play with it a little bit, to play with different keywords to sort of focus in on the things that are most important to you. But this is a site that Yale has is a sponsor of the site, so you should, from any yale.edu address, be able to log in and make use of it. And you'll see everything in there, from your large federal $35,000 full year awards to $500 to support research, for people who are studying the use of porn in society and whose grandparents or parents were born in Greece. I mean, there are some very small, very specific grants out there, and large federal awards out there. Grant Forward seems to have them all. The grants.gov website is a sort of a central clearinghouse for most of the federally funded fellowships that you might apply for. And I would just urge you, if you're looking into travel awards to go abroad, you should look also at the country websites. Look to see if the country itself has fellowships to attract students to come to the country. Not everybody does, but Germany and Japan have big agencies that provide a lot of money for this. There's the Inter-American Foundation that will fund travel to Central and South America. So there's a lot of ways to find grants that might be of interest to you. And finally, make use of the people in your department. Ask your faculty, ask the more senior students, find out whether other people have applied for or what agencies they've been involved with in the past, and see what they have to say. Now, if the most important message I have today is that it's important for you to apply for fellowships at this stage of your career, that it's great training for you, that it's really good practice. The second most important message I have is that when you're applying for a fellowship, it's really critical to understand the needs and the motivation of the agency that you're applying to. There are lots of organizations out there that have money that they're willing to give to you to promote your work, but they all have a different reason for doing it. And it's all well and good to say, well, I want to do this and I'm interested in that, and if you fund me, here are the things that I'll be able to do. But does it speak to the mission of the agency? I'll just give you two quick examples. I have students in the sciences who will apply, they're working on a project and they'll apply to both the NIH and the NSF. Now, the mission of the NIH is to cure disease and relieve human suffering. The NSF has that as a mission as well, but the NSF also has more of an educational outreach, a science literacy component to their mission. So that you can't just take the same project and submit it to both agencies. With the NIH, it's really, what is it that I'm going to do and how is this going to lead to, curing disease? With the NSF, it's, well, what am I going to do and how is it going to cure disease? But also, how is the training that I'm going to receive going to allow me to go out and improve science literacy? How am I going to share the results of my work with an audience beyond the people in my lab and the people in the scientific community that I work with? Another example is the Fulbright and the Fulbright Hays. So Fulbright is funded by the Department of State, and it's a cultural exchange grant. The Fulbright Hays is funded by the Department of Education, and it's really more of a language and cultural literacy grant. So again, you can have the same project and apply to both agencies for funding. But in the case of Fulbright, you really need to explain how in the course of doing this project, it will promote cultural exchange. These are where the opportunities for cultural exchange will be. Fulbright Hays doesn't care about cultural exchange so much as they care about the degree to which you are becoming a knowledge expert in the language and the culture of that country. They don't necessarily care what you're giving back. They want to know what you're getting so that you can come back to the United States and be a resource to the US government if they need to talk to somebody about conditions in that country. So same project, but a different spin on it so that you can speak to the mission of the agency and convince them that they want to support you. In understanding their mission, you also want to think about who at the agency is going to be reading your application. So, are these PhD level scientists who work in your field? If so, less explanation about, why you're doing what you're doing or specifically what you're doing may be appropriate. You'll want to get into more detail about the methodology and maybe some of the nuances about the work that you'll be engaged in. These may be PhD level, people who are not in your field. So if you apply to Fulbright, the Fulbright applications, for example, are all reviewed by country. So the first round of review, if you've applied to France and you're interested in, poetry at the time of the Renaissance, French poetry at the time of the Renaissance, the first people who are going to read your application are going to be 3 PhD level faculty who study France. But one of them might focus on medieval history. One of them might be interested in, modern history, and maybe one of them is doing religious studies. So educated people, yes, but not necessarily in your field. So in that case, you can't assume that they'll understand everything you're talking about right up front. You need to provide a little more detail about what it is you want to do, why this is interesting, why it's important, what kind of gaps you're filling in the knowledge in that field. I have a number of students now who are applying to PEO, which is a women's organization which provides funding for women in higher education. It's quite likely that the people who will be reading those applications may be doctors, lawyers, CEOs, highly educated people, but not necessarily PhDs, and certainly not people who are working in the fields that the students are applying in. So just think about who your audience is and what level of detail you need to provide in order to get them up to speed on what it is you're studying and why this is interesting. You can't assume that just because you think it's interesting that they're going to think it's interesting without you sort of pointing them to the different cues that would say, oh yeah, no, now that you've explained it to me, this makes sense. This does sound interesting. So once you've identified something you want to apply for and you've thought about, the motivation of the agency in providing the funding, there's some other things you can do. First of all, has anybody else in your department applied for this award in the past? It may be that your registrar has access to old applications. It may be that some of the students who have applied are still here and you can talk to them about their experience and whether or not they received any feedback and have any insights into what works or what doesn't work with an application. Maybe some of your faculty have served as reviewers for this organization, and they certainly then would be a great resource to tell you what the reviewers are looking for. If you're applying for international travel, the Macmillan Center is a great resource. They've got knowledge experts there who can talk to you about, what's going on in individual countries and things that you might need to think about, and problems that you might need to address in the application, pitfalls or problems that you might need to overcome that they can say that an agency might want to see that you're knowledgeable about. The Graduate Writing Lab, I want to say it's an outstanding resource. I have not sent anybody there who's ever come back and told me that it was a waste of their time. I've had a lot of people come back and say that they were really very helpful. They do a number of different things, including peer review writing groups, one-on-one mentoring with tutors. They're a fantastic resource if you're applying for an award where the people who are reviewing it are not necessarily going to be squarely in your field. Because now you're talking to an educated audience who can say, yeah, your writing is good, this looks like a type proposal, but I'm not sure I really understand what it is you're doing. I think maybe, you need to provide a little more information just up front, a couple of sentences to help orient the non-expert reader. So the Graduate Writing Lab can be a great source of that in a way that, your advisor, for example, might not be able to help you because they do what you do, and they're going to understand, what you're doing. So they'll be filling in any gaps that exist in the writing in their own head. The Graduate Writing Lab won't be able to do that, so they can ask you questions and have you go back and rewrite it and fill in those gaps yourself. In some cases, the funding agencies may encourage you to reach out to them directly before applying. And again, remember that they have money, they're supporting some cause, they want successful applicants. So it's not always the case, they don't all have the bandwidth to do this, but many of them will actually want you to reach out to them and say, hey, this is what I'm working on. This is something I think would be of interest to your agency. Is this something that would fly as a proposal? And they can give you feedback. Yeah, this sounds really interesting. We'd be more likely to fund this than that. You might want to steer it in this direction. But if they invite you to reach out, I encourage you to do so. You can get a lot of really valuable bits of information directly from them about what they would consider to be a successful application. And I just want to add, I'll have my contact information at the end of these slides, but you can certainly feel free to reach out to me at any time. I may not know about the specific award that you're applying for, but I do have quite a bit of experience with a variety of fellowship applications, and I can certainly help you figure out how to get the answers if you can't get them yourself. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the elements that would go into an application. And again, they're all different. This is not going to apply to every application, but almost certainly there's going to be some sort of a research proposal, just what it is that you want to do, and very often a personal statement and reference letters. And I'll talk about those each a little bit. And then depending on the award, they may want transcripts, they may want a CV. Some awards will ask you to provide a budget, and sometimes there are like short answer essays, essay prompts that they might ask you to complete. So I'll just talk about each of these in a little bit more detail. The research proposal, it's what you would expect. What do you want to do, and why do you want to do it, and how do you plan to do it? And it's surprising to me sometimes how many people will start these essays and not cover those three elements. They sort of launch into how they're going to do it before they've really explained what they want to do, and they never address why they want to do it. So you start big, and again, the amount of space you spend on this depends in part on the application requirements. Is this a 2-page proposal? Is it a 10-page proposal? That gives you clues to the level of detail that they might be looking for. And then again, thinking about the audience that's reading this and how expert they are in your field, you want to provide some description of this is what I'm interested in, this is why I'm interested in doing this, and then start to focus in on what's the plan. If you fund me, this is what I'll be able to do, this is how I'll go about doing it. Obviously, you'll want to talk about what you gain from doing this, and it's not just, well, I'll be able to complete my dissertation, but if your dissertation is a 4 or 5 or 6 year project, and you're asking for funding to go to a country for 3 months to gather data, what specifically will you gather while you're there? How is this going to inform your dissertation? What piece of the overall whole is this going to speak to? So hopefully you can get into that level of detail. And then, of course, what is the funding agency going to gain from this? How does my work advance your mission? What do you get out of this? And when you apply for a fellowship, make sure you know if they're expecting any deliverables. In some cases, they're not. They just expect you to go do your work and complete your dissertation. But in other cases, they expect a paper to be published, or they expect some sort of a report or some sort of presentation. Sometimes it's open-ended, but they expect you to produce something. So find out, if they're expecting a deliverable, and be sure to be upfront about what it is you plan to do. We have the Fulbright-Hays application actually provides a scoring sheet, and it says you get so many points for this and so many points for that. And one of the things that they will score you on, it's like 10 points for your plans to share the results of your dissertation. And I've had so many students who have just missed the cutoff for getting the grant because they never really said anywhere in the application how they were going to share the results from their dissertation. And they've said to me, well, I'm going to write my dissertation, and then, it's going to go into the library and it will be publicly available. It's like, well, that's fine, but you never said that. And so the reviewers docked you 10 points because you didn't say how you were going to share your results, and you missed the cutoff, and there's no appeal. So make sure you understand what they're looking for, and make sure you address those things in the proposal. And again, I can't say it enough. Just think about the audience. Who's reading this? What level of knowledge do they have? Think about the level of detail that you need to provide, the rationale for why you're doing this, and the methods that you're going to use to get the work done. So if they have a separate personal statement, hopefully, first of all, the agency has provided information about what they would like to see in a personal statement, so that it will be tailored to the needs of the funding agency. But that's not always the case. Sometimes they will say, and please provide a one-page personal statement, and you're sort of left to guess what they're looking for. So usually it's good to think about this as, it's a description of the experiences you've had, the professional and educational experiences, and maybe the personal experiences that have led you to this moment. How did you've explained in the research proposal what it is you want to study? How did you get here? How did you come onto this topic? What are the things that have motivated you to do this work? And what are the experiences that have prepared you to do this work? It's often the case that if they're going to fund you, they want to see that this is not just something that you're doing for 6 months and then going to go off and do something else. They want to see a journey. And that there's a motivation to do this work, and that if they fund you to do this, that this is an investment that's going to pay dividends down the road, that you're going to continue to do this kind of work, that you really have a passion for what it is you're trying to pursue, and that will fund you now, and this will help advance your career, and then you'll continue to do these sorts of things, and that will promote our mission as well. And one of the things that can be very helpful in the personal statement is any solid examples that you can provide of the kinds of skills or competencies that you would need to carry out the work. So there's a lot of people who like to say, oh, I'm a real leader, or I'm very adaptable, and if the situation on the ground changes, I'll be able to roll with the circumstances and make some changes. That's all well and good to say, but if you can provide examples of a time in the past when you've actually had to adapt, or when you've shown those leadership qualities, that's golden. That's really what they're looking for. And it doesn't need to be a comprehensive list of examples. Even one solid example can go really far and can put you ahead of people who say, they say they can do this, but have they ever done it in the past? So, providing examples of things that would be important to the funding agency is good. And just as you want to talk about your motivation to do this work and sort of how you came to this, something about your career aspirations, or sort of the next step, or where you're going to go from here. After you fund me to do this, and I do X, Y, and Z, where am I going to take this? Again, it's not true of every agency, but a lot of them are going to want to see that whatever it is they're funding you to do is a path on a journey. It's a piece of the puzzle. So they want to see where you're coming from, they want to see where you're going to, and they want to see how this funded experience is going to fit into that larger trajectory. You've all had references. You had to get 3 to get into graduate school, so you've all done this before. I think the biggest question I get from people is things like, gee, I feel like I should have my advisor write a letter for me, but I've only started working with the advisor, 2 or 3 months ago. They don't know me that well. Certainly they can talk about the importance of my work, but they don't know me personally, and they can't say a lot of things, and they certainly don't know anything about my past. Most, again, not all, but most of these applications are going to let you submit more than one reference, usually 3 is typical. So you should think about it in terms of, between them, the 3 referees should be able to speak about various aspects of your character. Usually the funding agency wants to know that, the work that you're proposing to do is in fact important, that it's going to advance the field in some way or fill in some gap in knowledge in the field. They want to know that you have the ability to carry out the work. It's one thing to show us something and yes, this is very exciting and we're really enthused by this, but are you the person to do it? Are you actually qualified to do this work? Reinforcing what I said about the personal statement, what is your motivation to do this? And often, information about what kind of support is available to you. Not financial support so much as intellectual support. Is there somebody to assist you in doing this, to guide you? And maybe something about your personality or your character. Are you highly motivated? Do you have a stick-to-itiveness? If you say you're going to do something, do you get it done? Do you have the flexibility of mind to adapt to situations? And if you run into problems, are you going to be able to overcome those problems and see this project through? So it's often the case that if you think about 3 people who might write for you, one of them really knows about the work that you're doing and why this is important, but they don't know you as well personally. And maybe somebody else has done field work with you, and maybe you reported to them in a difficult situation, and they can talk about your character and your ability to overcome obstacles, but they're not in your field. They don't do anything. They don't have anything to do with the kind of work you're doing. Collectively, they can sort of give a 360 view of you as an applicant. And that's really what you want to think about as you're trying to decide who should be writing for you. I said earlier that the second most important thing for you to do was to understand the goals of the agency. It's also important for your referees to understand the goals of the agency and to make sure that their letters are tailored to those goals. So that, I had a student come to me some years ago. He was applying to the NSF, and he said, one of my recommenders said, they read my proposal, and they said, oh, take out all this stuff about like the outreach that you've been doing in your teaching experience. The NSF doesn't care about that. They just want to see the science. Well, it's true that the science is important, and they're not going to fund a project if they're not excited about the science. But if all you have is good science, that's good enough for an honorable mention. It's not going to get you the NSF fellowship. Because there is this huge outreach component, this scientific literacy component to the NSF's mission. So you have to have good science, and you also have to show that you're willing to go out and share your science with non-scientists. They're both equally important parts of the application. So if the funding agency has an FAQ that you can print out, or if you can type up a cheat sheet for the referees and say, these are the things that are important to this funding agency. This is what they're looking for, and ask them to tailor their letter to those needs. It just reinforces the idea that this agency has a reason for providing the funding. We're trying to speak to those reasons. In some cases, you may be required to submit a budget with your application. I don't have a whole lot to say about that. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. Just a few tips I would say is, first of all, before you write up your budget, be aware of what the agency is willing to fund. They may say, we'll fund stipend and travel expenses and health insurance, but we don't fund tuition and we don't fund research expenses. Now, that said, they may want a comprehensive budget. They may want to know the total cost of what it is you're trying to do, even though they're only willing to fund a portion of it. Or do they only want you to submit a budget for the parts that they're willing to fund? Just know what their rules are and make sure that whatever it is you provide speaks to that. And don't be afraid to ask for help from people in your department. Others have done this before, so don't feel like you're entirely on your own trying to put together a budget. When you do the budgeting, there's this sort of push-pull between, how much should I ask for? Is this going to be enough? I don't want to ask for too much. You certainly don't want to pad the budget. If the agency is looking at, 3 applications, they say, well, this person's asking for 10,000, and this person's asking for 5,000, this person's asking for 4,000. We'd like all 3 projects equally. We can fund this one, or we can fund these 2. they might go for the 2. But at the same time, you also want to make sure you ask for what you need. There's no point in submitting a proposal if you know it's going to cost $500 a month to rent an apartment in the place that you're going, and you only ask for $200 a month. Unless you have another plan for coming up with the other 300, you're not going to have a place to live. So make sure you ask for what you need. Try not to ask for more than what you need. And use the people around you who have done this before to get some feedback about what they will and about what they've done and what they think is appropriate. It's also useful to know whether the agency will allow you to seek additional funding if they support you. In some cases, Fulbright's a good example of this. They'll say that we're giving you a stipend and we're giving you a travel budget. So we expect you not to be getting a stipend or travel support from other sources. On the other hand, we're not paying any research expenses. So if you can find somebody else who's willing to fund the research expenses, that's perfectly fine. There are other agencies that, they're giving you a small fellowship. It's, $5,000 in stipend. They know this isn't enough. They expect you to go out and get other rewards. And it might even be helpful in that case to say in the application, these are the other places that I'm reaching out to try to get funding. But if you've said that your total budget is going to be $50,000, if that's what you need to get this done, and you're applying to this agency for $10,000, they may say, well, this is fine. We're excited by this, but we want to know where he's getting the other 40,000 from before we commit our money, because 10,000 isn't going to allow him or her to do what he or she needs to do. So again, you have to read the guidelines and see what they say, and then try to tailor the application to what they've asked for. Just a couple of tips. It's useful to keep transcripts handy, to keep your CV up to date. I find that when you're applying for these things, it's always just a lot easier to do if the supporting materials are sort of ready to go. If all you really need to do is write the proposal and then slip everything else in. And again, read the rules. Don't just rely on what other people have told you or what you think you know about the agency. There's going to be some sort of a call for applications. There'll be a solicitation document. Read the instructions. Read them carefully. Do they want a CV? Do they want you to enter all of this information into an online form field? They've asked for transcripts. Do they have to be official transcripts? Well, unofficial transcripts do. What happens if you can only obtain electronic transcripts? How do they handle that? If this is one of those grants where they do have some short answer essays, they're asking specific questions, don't feel like you need to repeat what's in the essays in the statements. You can, use your space wisely. And if you've got something in one place, use the other space to talk about other things. Certainly, be aware of application deadlines. Most of them are pretty solid. Most places will shut down their applications at the deadline, so you can't submit things late. And remember that you don't have full control over everything. So if you've requested transcripts or you've requested letters of recommendation, you can tell people when these things are due, but they're going to work sort of on their own timetables. So you want to make sure you let people know well in advance. Make sure they know what the deadlines are. Don't just tell them, this is due on October 30th. Make sure they know this is due at noon on October 30th, 5 o'clock on October 30th. So they're not thinking it's a midnight deadline and they try to submit it and find out that they can't get in. And silly stuff, I've seen so many students get caught up with, they've submitted something, but they've used the wrong font, or they violated the guidelines on margins or something. So again, just read the instructions, make sure you know what they're looking for, and make sure you conform to whatever their application guidelines are. Just a few final thoughts, and then we'll open this up for questions. It's not always the case, but it's often the case that if you've submitted the proposal, once they give you an answer, they may give you feedback. You may get comments, you may get a review of your application. If you do, make use of it. Read what they have to say. If you didn't get funded, feel free to rewrite and respond to the critiques that they've provided, and then resubmit. I've seen even at the faculty level, I saw a grant a few months ago. The agency said, we think that this proposal is too large. We think it would benefit from being more focused on a smaller number of faculty and a sort of a subfield within this larger field. and they resubmitted the grant, and they basically had a long explanation about how the funding agency was wrong and why it needed to be a larger grant. Now, certainly they're within their rights to do that, but I don't think that was a very wise approach. If the funding agency has said, we like what you've submitted, we're willing to fund this, we're not willing to fund that, don't come back and try to get that funded again. Respond to what they've had to say. Don't ignore the small awards. There's a lot of grants out there, $25,000, $30,000, $35,000 fellowships and so forth, large travel awards, and those are great if you can get them. But the small grants help too. Somebody who can cobble together enough small awards has the equivalent of a large award. And again, like I said at the beginning, funding begets funding. If somebody sees that you're out there and you're applying for this and that and the other thing, and you've been successful here and you've been successful there, it sort of greases the wheels. You're more likely to get that big award down the road if you have a couple of small awards to your name. We had a student here a few years ago from, I forget exactly, it was a Scandinavian country. And I think he fully funded 2 years of his education. I don't think any of the awards he had were worth more than $8,000, but he had 4 or 5 of them, and together they equaled a full stipend. It was really pretty impressive. And again, just going back to what I said at the beginning, you should be proactive and you should be applying for these now, not after you get out of Yale and suddenly you need the external support and you don't have the backstop. You do not want the first application that you send in to be the one that, if it's not funded, you can't do the work that you want to do. So please, if you're looking at the support that Yale's giving you and you're saying, oh, there's all this money from the Macmillan Center and I've got this stipend support, I don't really need to be applying. This is just a great time to get the practice. You may be successful, you may not be. If you're not, you can still go out and do what you need to do because we do have other forms of support. But the first grant is always the hardest. They get easier to write. The more you get, the easier they get to get more. So take advantage now of this sort of safety net that you have, and please go out and look for these. So I'll stop here. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. And I have contact information here, so please feel free to contact me later if you're applying for something and you have more specific questions than might be appropriate in this setting.
Thank you so much, Dean Harper-Mangels. This has been great and just what we were hoping for. If any attendees do have questions that you've not yet submitted in the Q&A, please feel free to type those into the Q&A and we'll do our best to get them asked and answered here. We do have some questions already. They kind of range from the particular to the more general, but let me just start with this one since it's kind of chronologically first in some sense. One person asks, is your first year in graduate school too early to start applying for grants and fellowships? What's your opinion on that?
I'm going to stop the share, but I'll put it back up at the end if anybody still needs my contact information. I think it's never too early to start applying. Of course, it depends on, everybody comes into graduate school in sort of a different place. Some people, already know what they want to do for their dissertation and they know, exactly why they've come here and who they want to work with. And that's great. And other people, have general ideas, but they're going to spend the first 2 years kicking around and taking classes and going to seminars and trying to figure out where their passion lies. So what I would say is, and just as we have a lot of students who are in different places, the fellowships are all in different places, right? There are some fellowships that are very specific. They support very specific types of work. And there are others that are very, much more general, that are really, to support students who, one day will be experts in their field, but they're not necessarily designed to support a specific, course of study. The NSF Graduate Research Fellowship is a great example of this. And I think a lot of people don't understand, that they don't just fund the natural sciences, they fund the social sciences as well. And, you write a proposal for the NSF, and they're evaluating that proposal. They want you to propose something that is interesting and innovative, that you have a plan for doing. But largely what they're doing is evaluating your ability to come up with a project. They're evaluating your ability to design a study and go out and conduct that work. They don't necessarily expect you to do this specific study. In fact, a lot of the people who are applying for this are actually college seniors who, at the time they're submitting the application, don't actually know where they're going to be in graduate school yet. So, something like that, and I should say there are a few others like that where you really have to apply in your first or second year. They're intended to be early year awards. So I would encourage students to look for those. But obviously, as you move on, as you move into your third and fourth year, you've written a prospectus, you have a defined dissertation, then you're going to be applying for different types of grants that are much more specific and much more sort of utilitarian. We're supporting work in this field, where we give you travel money so you can go to this country and gather the data you need for your dissertation. So just understand that there's a wide range of grants out there. And so while the types of things that you will look at will change as you transition through graduate school, it's never too soon to start looking.
I think you just anticipated or maybe answered this other question that we received, which is, have you ever seen people apply to grants and fellowships that end up changing their career trajectories, not just allowing them to do what they thought they were going to do at the moment that they applied to that grant or fellowship?
Yeah, I think especially with a lot of the travel grants, I see this all the time with Fulbright fellows. They propose to do X, and they get funded to do X, and they go to whatever country they're going to do, and while they're there, they just have this amazing experience. And they're either turned on to other resources that they weren't aware of, or they run into problems that they weren't expecting, and they need to shift gears. And by the time they come back, their research has gone in a completely different but totally exciting direction. So they can really be transformative in that sense. Not obviously doesn't happen to everybody. Some people just go and do what they said they were going to do, and that's fine too. But yeah, it's not at all uncommon for people to find the process of doing the research takes them in a very different direction than what they thought they were going in when they started.
That's great. I have some mechanical questions for you that have popped up here as well. You mentioned a cheat sheet for recommenders at one point in your talk, which was really very helpful. So one of the questions here is about how an applicant, a student, can help their advisor to best support them in the application process. For example, by writing the strongest letter of recommendation that the recommender can write. So the question, for example, is, should I be providing a set of documents to my recommenders in advance that describe things like my personality, my project, my motivation? Beyond the FAQ, how should I describe the fellowship or grant opportunity to my recommenders? Any further thoughts about what cheat sheets or kind of document packets for recommenders might look like?
Yeah, that's great. I would say that there are two things that would be very helpful to your recommenders. The first is just understanding the goals of the agency. What are they looking for? And it may be that there's just a page you can print out that from the agency itself that says these are our goals, or there's an FAQ or something. Or if not, if you've read their materials and you don't have something easy that you can sort of point them to, then you can type something up and say, this is what this agency is supporting. These are the sorts of things that they've said they're looking for in an application. These are the points I've tried to hit on in my proposal. And then the second part of that is just sort of your personal qualities. And I would say, I don't know that I would give an advisor a cheat sheet that says, well, this is my personality, or, something along those lines. But certainly, I talked about some of those tangible examples that you might put into a personal statement. And if you want to tell them, these are some of the things that I have done that I think make me qualified to do this. These are some of the things, these experiences that I've had that I think will be of interest to this agency, and that I intend to promote in my essays to the degree that you feel comfortable doing so. Please try to speak to these in your letter.
That's great. You gave some wonderful advice about getting feedback on, the personal statement or other parts of the application that will be submitted. And one person asks, they say, I worry that I'm getting the wrong kind of feedback on my application. When I speak to my peers in my department or my academic advisors, I feel like they continue to push me to be narrow and more specific. How should I balance that sort of feedback from experts and peers, some of whom, of course, who never received a grant like this before, with the kind of feedback I can receive from, for example, the Graduate Writing Lab?
Yeah, that's tricky. I mean, part of the process you're in now as a student and becoming a full-fledged academic is sort of, it's that transition from being a student to being, the master, right? It's sort of knowing, when you have to take, the advice that's being given to you by people who are older and more experienced and more credentialed, and when it's time to stand up and say, no, I actually know more about this than you do, and I appreciate your advice, but we're going my way with it. So this is part of that process. And I place great deference on what the faculty have to say and the advice that they give, but I've also seen that they don't know everything about everything. I gave that one example of the professor, who was writing for the NSF applicants, who said, oh, yeah, take out all of the stuff about your activities outside of the lab. They don't care about that. No, they really do care about that. And taking that out would have been a huge mistake. So, what you need to weigh is the degree to which, is the advice you're getting simply a matter of personal preference, or is it really going against what the agency is looking for? And if it's really going against what the agency is looking for, then you have to, go against that advice. You have to, go your own way and say, no, this is what the agency is looking for. The people who work in the field, they know all the nuances about the field. And if they were reviewing an application in this field, they would expect you to be knowledgeable about those nuances. But if you know that this is being read by people who are not experts in the field, then you need to step up a level, and you really need to give them the bigger picture and understand that the nuances that are so important to you and to your advisor and to other people in your circle are going to be lost on people who are actually making these funding decisions. But it's hard, there's no easy answer to that. It's really, you're going to get conflicting advice, and part of becoming a professional is evaluating that advice and saying, yeah, in this circumstance, this is good advice, this is bad advice, this is what I'm going to do.
I think I have another question for which there's not necessarily an easy answer. There's a question kind of about tone and about sort of selling oneself or trumpeting oneself. Question is, I'm worried about coming off as overly confident in my applications, which is funny because I don't feel altogether confident about my work. So how do I think about striking a balance between modesty on the one hand, parentheses, I am still learning, and mastery on the others. I am an emerging professional and you should give me money.
That's a great question. I would say, obviously I don't want to oversell this, but this is not the time to be humble. You are a developing professional in this field. You are becoming a knowledge expert on your subject, and you want to promote yourself as such. Now, there are certain grants, and I have a lot of experience working with Fulbright fellows, so I keep coming back to that. One of the things that Fulbright wants to know is that people are adaptable. They understand that if you're going to Tanzania to do some research, and there's civil strife there and there's a disease outbreak, you might not be able to do what you've proposed to do once you get there. And situation's unpredictable. They understand that things can change very suddenly. They want to know that the people that they're sending overseas are going to be able to deal with that situation, and you're not going to just suddenly become paralyzed and ineffective. So for a proposal like that, it's perfectly fine to say, this is what I want to do, these are the resources I need, this is what I expect to be able to accomplish. I'm aware of these situations and aware that there may be circumstances that could prevent this from happening. Should that happen, here's some other directions that I could possibly go in. So that's one level at which you might sort of just acknowledge that, yeah, I've got these great plans, but sometimes when the rubber hits the road, plans fall through. And I've got ideas about how I would adapt to that and run with that. What you don't want to do is certainly say, well, here's what I want to do. I'm not sure if I really have the expertise to do this, or I'm not sure if I'm good enough to get this done. If you're not sure, then they're not sure, and they're not going to fund you. So that's the end of it. To the degree that you're proposing to do things where you really don't have expertise. So I'll give you a good example of this. I had a student some years back, again, applying for a Fulbright. She was an engineer. She wanted to go to Indonesia, and she was interested in water filtration and delivery of clean water to rural communities. So part of her project was actually working in a lab at the university there, studying water filtration systems and thinking about ways to make them cheaper, more affordable, so they could be mass produced and gotten out to the public. And as an engineer, she was well qualified to do that work. There was a second component to her proposal in which she was going to do a social science component. She was going to go out into the communities and find out who was using the water filtration systems that were already available to them. Who was using them, who wasn't using them, what were the barriers to using them, how effective were they, how often were people getting sick, and so forth. She did not have a background in conducting social science research. And in fact, she didn't have the local language that might allow her to go out into these rural communities. She was fine working at the university, but not necessarily in these communities outside of the city. But she had a great plan because she was paired up with an NGO that was working in the country that was interested in this project, and she was going to partner with them to do the social science component of the project. So she was able in her application to say, there's two parts to my project. These are the skills I have to carry out this one, and that's solid. These are the skills I have to carry out the other, and they're a little more tenuous, but here's the support that I have to help me do that. And she was funded for this. So I think that, if there's a real, you don't want to be humble. You don't want to be saying, oh, I could probably do this. Other people might be better at it. Not the time to be humble. But if there's a real component to the application where you think, I don't have the skills to do this yet. And anybody reading the application is going to see that I don't have the skills to do this yet. Then you want to talk about, well, what kind of support do I have? Maybe this grant doesn't start for a year. And so how am I going to get the skills I need in the next year? Or what kind of support am I getting from Yale? Or what kind of support am I getting from the area where I'll be conducting this research that will allow me to both develop my skills and carry this out despite the lack of experience that I have?
As you're talking, Robert, it strikes me that you're, in a sense, urging people to express confidence about the problem that they're looking to address as being an important problem, the questions that they're bringing to that problem, right? And their own ability to address those questions. There's also a piece of this, it seems to me, in which applicants are trying to emphasize, as you say, their flexibility, or other ways to think about this might be curiosity, willingness to change course if the answers come through that they're not expecting. And I do sometimes feel like sometimes applicants make too strong of an argument that they know exactly what the answers are, and they just need to go out and find the evidence to substantiate exactly what they know to already be true. Have you ever seen that as a problem in any students you've worked with?
Yeah, that comes up periodically. They've sort of already decided what the conclusion is before they've actually gathered the data. And they don't leave any wiggle room for, if I go out and find these sources and it's not actually matching up with what I think I'm going to find, they don't sort of allow for that possibility in their brain space, and I think that can be a real problem. And again, it's hard to talk about this in the abstract because, again, every funding agency is a little bit different. Some of these grants are funding the student. They're funding your development as a scholar. And so that curiosity, that flexibility, that idea that, this project might not work out, but this person's going to learn a lot in that process and is going to be a better scholar for it in the future. That's great for some agencies. And others, they want a deliverable. We're funding you to go out and get X. And this is why we're giving you the money. And if you can't get X, then we're going to give the money to somebody else. And that's, again, one of those things where, you might, one award might be more appropriate for a second or third year student who's still developing but isn't sure about everything, whereas the other one might be good for a fifth or sixth year student who's pretty far along in their research, already has drawn their conclusions, just needs to go out and, get some supporting data or fill in some gaps somewhere and it's a much more specific, detailed grant than they might otherwise be applying for.
That makes sense. I have two more questions for you, and they're both pretty practical. The first person asks basically, how do I know what a reasonable budget looks like that isn't, quote, padded? I'm not asking to spend the night in a 5-star hotel, but do I have to say that I will sleep in a 1-star hotel?
The best way to answer this, I'd say, is that other people have probably gone to wherever it is you're going and had to provide a budget to. And so it's a good idea to just talk to other people who have traveled and see what kinds of budgets they have proposed. There's some resources online. Some of the funding agencies, for example, will have guidelines as to what they will provide for this or that or the other thing. And if you have, if you say, I'm going to go to this country, and yes, the program will provide up to, $500 a month for accommodations, but I actually know somebody in the country, and I won't need that. I can pay them, $100 for expenses, and the agency will appreciate the fact that you're finding ways to save money. But I would say, in terms of knowing what to do, just talk to other people who have applied. I think the Macmillan Center is probably a great resource for travel abroad, where they could say, well, this is what sort of the living expenses are in the country. Your travel expenses, go online and look at a variety of airlines and figure out, what round trip tickets are going to cost, and try to pick the cheapest one that doesn't involve you, flying in a cargo plane with crates full of chickens. You don't have to cut it to the bone and have like the cheapest budget you can possibly find, but they do expect you to cut costs where you can, but usually there are resources online, and certainly resources that the university can say, yes, living expenses in this country, for a traveler would be between $300 and $700 a month, for example, and so probably best then not to come down at the $700 side. You don't have to say 300. You want to give yourself a little room maybe, but try to come in under 500 if that's the range. But other people have done this before you and have had experience and had budgets approved or had budgets cut. And so there should be resources out there to help you figure out what's appropriate.
Great, thank you. And the last question, the answer may be the same, which is that there are other people who can help you with this, but maybe you have particular thoughts about who. The question is really about CVs, and the person says, I'm not sure if my CV is properly formatted or if it has the right information on it. Do you have any suggestions about how one should get feedback on their CV to make sure that it's professionally ready?
First of all, I will just say that there's a lot of different CVs out there. There's different styles. There's not necessarily one right way to do it. And I myself, when I was younger and applying for jobs, depending on the nature of the job I was applying for, would move things around on my CV, which would either, which would emphasize my research or would emphasize, my teaching experience or what have you, depending on the job I was applying for. So it's not a one size fits all. But I think that the Office for Career Strategies is a great resource for, if you contact them and say you need some help and you need somebody to look at your CV, and give you some feedback on that. They have people there that can help you with that.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Dean Harper-Mangels. That's not the most, extravagant way to end this session. I think that was rather kind of mundane, but I think really important advice, because I think it's one of the many things that so many applicants worry about when they're making these applications. And as you well know, many people are doing these applications while they're very busy with other work. And so trying to figure out ways to explain what people ought to be doing and how is just so key. And so, thank you so much for making such a compelling argument for the importance of making these applications. I think you're absolutely right that applying in these ways really is key for people to learn how to promote their own work, and that funding begets funding, as you say, and that, for those reasons and others, encouraging people in, the greater RITM network and elsewhere to be looking for these opportunities, I think is incredibly beneficial, even as it can be hard and difficult in the course of one's, regular, very busy life as well. So,
and I'll say, It's the mundane aspects of the application that often people find daunting. They know what they're doing, they understand their research, but then they find out they have to pull in all of these other pieces of information, and that gets a lot of people caught up. I remember, the first time when I worked at Northwestern before I came to Yale, and my director came to me and they said, we're going to apply for an institutional training grant. Now, these are large multi-million-dollar awards that fund multiple faculty and multiple students. The proposal itself, the scientific component to it, is only 10 to 15 pages. The entire proposal is about 200 pages, because suddenly you need data about students going back 10 years and how many people came in and where did they wind up going and what's your training program look like. And that was really hard to do the first time. But I got to tell you, by the time we did the fifth one, we had a process, we had a lot of the data already. And so once we had the intellectual component put together, then we could just slot in all of those mundane elements, and it got a lot easier to do. So this is one of the things where I say it gets easier to write these things as you go forward, because as you get used to doing the mundane parts of it, you can focus on the interesting intellectual component and then just add in all of that mundane stuff that needs to be part of the application. And it just gets so much easier over time.
Well, I really appreciate that. And I think this is the kind of training that we get too little of, at least on our side of the university. So thank you so much for your time today and for giving us the benefit of your skills. I'm sure people will follow up with you. And I know you've already shared your email address with people. And so I would just add my voice to encourage people to write you directly if there's anything that they think you might be able to help them with, or direct them elsewhere. I think you've offered yourself up as a resource. So we really appreciate that.
Yeah, please take advantage of me. This is why I'm here. So if you have questions, please get in touch.
All right. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, everybody.
My pleasure.
Take care.